I never thought owning a ranch would turn into a daily battle with a woman who thought she owned the world, or at least my land. But then Karen showed up. Karen, the HOA president, who apparently graduated top of her class in entitlement and passive-aggressive notes, decided that my peaceful little slice of heaven was actually community property. It all started one quiet morning. I was sipping my coffee, watching the sunrise paint the fields gold when a letter slid under my door. You know the type, the kind that immediately makes your stomach drop. Notice of community land violation, it said in bold letters. My first thought was, is this a prank? Maybe some kids left it. But no, Karen's signature was right there, sharp and confident, like she was stamping her authority onto my ranch. I sat there, coffee forgotten, staring at the paper. Community land? What the hell does that even mean? I muttered to myself. My ranch had been in my family for decades, and I paid property taxes that could have probably funded a small city. And now Karen, armed with her clipboard and a sense of divine justice, was claiming she had the right to dictate what I could and couldn't do on my own land. Of course, I should have been angry. I should have called her immediately, demanded she apologize, or at least let her know that I wasn't some pushover she could intimidate with fancy HOA words. But instead, I laughed. Not the polite chuckle either. I mean a full-on, sit-down-on-the-porch, nearly spit-my-coffee-out laugh. Because honestly, the idea of Karen, with her bright pink blazer and perfectly manicured nails, trying to take my ranch, that was comedy gold. And yet, beneath the laughter, there was a knot in my stomach. Because Karen wasn't just sending letters. She was coming. I could feel it in my bones, the way she wanted to stomp across my property, take measurements, make me feel small. And the thought made my blood boil. I decided to prepare myself. I walked the fence line, making sure every post was solid, every gate locked, and every cow looked presentable. I even gave the horses a pep talk, something along the lines of stay calm, don't spook her, but also don't let her think she owns this place. Ridiculous, probably. But when Karen arrived, I wanted every inch of my ranch to scream, I am the boss here. Days passed, and I kept imagining the confrontation. Karen marching down my driveway, clipboard in hand, glaring at me as if I had personally insulted her entire HOA board. I pictured myself calmly, confidently telling her where she could go and how quickly, all while my trusty dog, Buster, stood by, pretending he wasn't about to cause chaos. Then finally the day came. I saw her car, a shiny black SUV, turn onto the long dirt path that led to my house. She stepped out, perfectly poised, sunglasses reflecting the early morning sun, and began surveying the ranch like it was a museum exhibit she was unhappy with. She didn't see me yet. I watched from the porch, coffee in hand, heart pounding with a strange mix of fear, anticipation, and, let's be honest, gleeful amusement. She thought she was in charge. She thought she could dictate how I lived on my land. And that's when I realized this wasn't going to be a normal HOA dispute. Oh no, this was war. The first words she said when she saw me made my blood boil and my mind race. I'm here to make sure the property lines are respected, she declared, her voice sweet but dripping with self-importance. Property lines? I wanted to laugh, but instead I smiled calmly and replied, well, welcome to my ranch. Feel free to walk, but mind the fence. She raised an eyebrow. I raised mine. The air thickened with tension. Somewhere in the distance, Buster barked as if to say, don't worry, we've got this. And at that moment, I realized something important. Karen didn't just want to enforce rules. She wanted to make me feel powerless. She wanted me to bend. And the worst part, if I gave her even an inch, she would take a mile. I clenched my fists, my mind racing with possibilities. How could I protect my ranch? How could I make sure Karen and everyone else who thought they could control me understood one simple truth? This land was mine. Little did she know I had a plan. And it started with the fence. Karen didn't waste any time. By mid-morning, she was already striding down my long driveway, clipboard in hand, heels clicking against the gravel like she was auditioning for a reality TV show about HOA dictators. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the mix of irritation and amusement swirling inside me. There was something almost cinematic about the way she moved, all sharp angles and self-importance, like the ranch was a stage and she was about to give the performance of her life. Good morning, she said, voice syrupy sweet but with an edge that screamed, I'm in charge here. I'm here to discuss the boundaries of your property and ensure compliance with the HOA. I set down my coffee and smiled, deliberately slow, like I had all the time in the world. Boundaries, huh? Well, welcome to my ranch. Feel free to take a stroll, just watch your step. Mind the fence. She tilted her head, glaring. Excuse me. I pointed casually toward the old electric fence I had installed years ago. Not a threatening kind, just a proper ranch fence. But I knew it carried a little sting if someone curious decided to get too close. You know, the one marking the edge of my property. I'd hate for anyone to get hurt. Her eyes narrowed. I assure you I have every right to inspect this property. That's when I realized something. Karen wasn't here to negotiate. She was here to intimidate. And she had no idea that intimidation doesn't work on someone who literally grew up riding horses through thorny fields and arguing with stubborn cows. I decided to play along, calmly walking her through the property line, pointing out the gates, the barns, the water troughs, everything, while she scribbled furiously on her clipboard. Every word she said was dripping with condescension. "This is technically community land," she said at one point, her pen poised like a wand of power. I laughed just a little more than I probably should have. "Technically?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "You mean according to your imagination?" She blinked, clearly unprepared for humor. "That's not funny," she snapped, jabbing her pen at me like it was a sword. "Maybe not," I said smoothly, "but it's true." The tension in the air was electric, pun intended, but it was also oddly cinematic. The sun glinted off the fence posts, the cows grazed silently in the distance, and Buster, my loyal dog, trotted behind me like a miniature sheriff, sniffing everything Karen touched. Honestly, if someone were filming this, it would have looked like a showdown in an old western. Karen as the self-righteous villain, me as the calm rancher, and my property as the prize. And then it happened. Karen, completely ignoring my subtle warning, stepped closer to the fence. "I think it's important that I physically mark the exact boundary," she said, reaching out to touch one of the posts. I froze for a second, heart pounding. Part of me wanted to shout, "Don't touch it," but instead I let her make the mistake. Slowly, deliberately, she laid her hand on the post. I didn't move, I just watched. Her face changed immediately. A tiny shock traveled up her arm, harmless but enough to make her yelp, stumble back, and clutch her perfectly manicured fingers. What did you do?" she screamed, her composure cracking for the first time. I held up my hands innocently. "Fence has a little electricity, you know, for safety, keeps the livestock from wandering, keeps trespassers in check." I grinned. "Didn't hurt, did it?" She glared at me, red-faced, trembling with a mixture of shock and fury. "This is outrageous. I'm calling the HOA." "Please," I said, smiling wider. "I'd love to see that paperwork. Meanwhile, the fence works." She stormed off to her car, muttering about lawsuits and unacceptable behavior, while I leaned against the fence, laughing quietly to myself. I had won the first battle, not with lawyers, not with money, but with something far simpler, a tiny jolt and a healthy dose of reality. But even as I chuckled, I knew this wasn't over. Karen was the kind of person who never quit. She would come back, she would escalate, and she would try to take things further. And I had to be ready. Because if she thought one little fence, or one harmless shock, was enough to scare me off my own ranch, she was gravely mistaken. I thought Karen storming off after the fence incident was the end of it. Silly me. By the next morning, the universe, and apparently the HOA, had other plans. I was sipping my coffee on the porch when my phone buzzed. Multiple messages, emails, even a text from a neighbor I barely knew. "Karen's calling a board meeting about your ranch." My eyebrows shot up. Board meeting? About my property? I almost choked on my coffee. I could picture it. Karen sitting at the head of the table, finger wagging, declaring my ranch an affront to civilization. And now, apparently, she was going to have the HOA lawyers and the entire board backing her up. By mid-afternoon, a small army of HOA members arrived at my property. Not all of them, thankfully, but enough to make it feel like I was under siege. Clipboards, measuring tapes, cameras, and the occasional yappy dog, they all piled out of their cars, looking like they were about to inspect a crime scene instead of a ranch. Karen led the charge, of course, striding across my property like she was Napoleon surveying conquered land. "This is a community issue," she declared, voice booming. "We need to make sure property boundaries are enforced." I couldn't help myself. I laughed just a little because the absurdity of it all was breathtaking. I walked toward them calmly, hands raised in mock surrender. "Boundaries, huh? You mean the ones marked by a fence that doesn't appreciate visitors?" The board members blinked, the lawyers scribbled notes. Karen's face turned crimson. That's when the fun began. Some of the neighbors, curious but nervous, had gathered behind the fence. They whispered, unsure whether to laugh or run, and the livestock seemed to sense the tension. The goats batted at their pens, the chickens scattered, and one particularly stubborn cow stared Karen down like she had personally offended it. I swear if that cow could have spoken, it would have said, "Get off my land, lady." Karen, completely unbothered by the chaos, marched to the edge of the fence and attempted to measure it with a tape. "We have to record every inch," she declared, poking her pen at the posts. I watched silently. Buster, my dog, wagged his tail. The first fence shock had clearly left an impression, but I didn't want to escalate, yet, not until I fully understood the HOA's plan. Then it hit me. They weren't here to discuss the fence. They were here to intimidate me, to make me doubt myself, to make me feel small. And the sad, funny part? They were wasting their time. I knew this ranch like the back of my hand. Every post, every gate, every patch of dirt belonged to me, and no amount of fancy papers or HOA drama could change that. I decided to let Karen have her moment. She looked important, scribbling on her clipboard, barking orders at the board members, and measuring posts with a seriousness usually reserved for NASA engineers. Meanwhile, I stood back and observed. Every frustrated glance, every muttered complaint, it was all adding up. By the time she finished, she had a stack of notes and a plan to escalate the situation. Fines, legal threats, official letters, I could feel it in my gut. The storm was coming and it wasn't going to be small. I walked toward my barn, pretending to busy myself with chores. My mind, however, was racing. I had to think strategically. Karen was relentless. She wasn't going to stop. And if I wanted to protect my ranch, I had to stay one step ahead. I peeked over my shoulder and caught Karen glaring at me. That look, that mix of frustration, anger, and disbelief. She couldn't understand why I wasn't panicking, why I wasn't begging her for mercy. And that, I realized, was my greatest advantage. Because here's the truth. Karen thrived on control, on making people feel powerless. And on that ranch under my watch, she had none, not a single shred. I smiled to myself, watching her stomp off to her SUV. She was planning her next move, and I would be ready. The first skirmish had ended in my favor, but the war was just beginning. Karen wasn't going to quit, and the HOA wasn't going to let go easily. And honestly, I was kind of looking forward to the next round. The morning of the HOA inspection arrived like a storm I hadn't asked for but somehow knew was coming. I could see Karen's shiny black SUV approaching from the porch. She had brought reinforcements this time. Board members, a couple of lawyers, and even one guy who looked like he might be auditioning for a detective role in a low-budget TV show. Clipboards in hand, cameras rolling, measuring tape swinging. Everyone looked ready to officially take my ranch apart, 1 inch at a time. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the mix of nerves and amusement in my chest. Because here's the thing, I wasn't scared. But I knew Karen wanted me to be. She thrived on control, on the illusion that she could break people down with rules, regulations, and fancy letters. She didn't realize I had lived through more chaos in a single morning on this ranch than she could ever imagine in her whole suburban life. Karen started immediately, marching toward the fence like she owned it. "We're going to measure every boundary, record every corner, and document any violation," she said, voice booming like a drill sergeant. I watched calmly from a distance, holding my coffee like I wasn't about to laugh at the absurdity of it all. Behind her, the board members stumbled over one another, trying to keep pace. Lawyers scribbled notes furiously, probably imagining a headline reading, "Local Rancher versus HOA, the Battle of the Century." And then the chaos started. One of the goats, yes, a goat, decided Karen's clipboard was a threat to national security and charged. It knocked her over, sending her papers flying into the grass. She shrieked, flailing like a villain in a cartoon. Meanwhile, a group of chickens scattered in every direction, and one particularly brave rooster landed on the hood of Karen's SUV, crowing like it owned the place, which technically it did. I couldn't help myself. I laughed so hard I almost spilled my coffee. Karen stood there red-faced, shouting, while the board members tried to maintain their dignity. The lawyers looked horrified, probably calculating how much this inspection disaster would cost them in wasted time. Then Karen, determined not to be defeated by barnyard animals, marched to the fence. "I'm going to touch the property line myself," she declared, her tone sharp, her hand reaching toward the post. I froze for just a second. Buster, my dog, growled softly as if warning her, but she ignored it. I didn't move either. There was no rush. The suspense hung in the air, thick and electric, because Karen had no idea that the fence had a little surprise waiting for her. Her hand touched the post, and then with a tiny zap, her smug expression froze. She yelped, stumbling back, her perfectly styled hair slightly askew, her manicure apparently unharmed but her ego thoroughly bruised. I leaned casually against the porch railing. "Fence works," I said, voice calm, almost casual. "Keeps livestock in, keeps intruders out, keeps certain HOA presidents from overstepping." Karen glared at me, shaking her hand like I had personally insulted her entire family tree. "This is unacceptable," she screamed, voice cracking. "You can't just—" "Watch the fence next time," I said softly, smiling. The board members were flustered. The lawyers were scribbling furiously. Some neighbors who had gathered behind the fence were trying not to laugh, though a few couldn't help it. And the livestock? They were smugly calm, as if to say we warned her. Karen finally stomped back to her SUV, muttering threats about fines, legal action, and reporting this immediately to the HOA president of presidents. I had to stifle another laugh. She looked like she'd been through a tornado, one powered by goats, chickens, and the undeniable truth that she had no control here. And yet, even as I watched her drive away, heart still racing from the absurdity of the morning, I knew this wasn't the end. Karen didn't quit. She never quit. She was probably already plotting her next move, fantasizing about some grand HOA victory that involved paperwork, cameras, and maybe even more ridiculous animals. I sighed, shaking my head. The first inspection disaster had ended in my favor, but the war was far from over. Karen had underestimated me, underestimated my land, and underestimated the fact that some things, like a rancher's patience and a well-timed fence, were not to be trifled with. I glanced at the fence again, feeling a little surge of pride. It wasn't just a boundary marker. It was a statement, a warning, a promise. And Karen was about to find out exactly what that meant. It was a quiet morning, the kind where the sun hits the pasture just right, making everything look peaceful and golden. But I knew better. Something in the air told me Karen wasn't done yet. She was the kind of person who didn't just step back when she got embarrassed. No, she doubled down. And this time I had a feeling she was coming for revenge. Sure enough, mid-morning, I saw her black SUV rolling down my driveway again. This time, she had brought reinforcements. 2 more board members and some guy carrying a video camera like he was documenting a nature show, except the wild animal in question was Karen herself. I tried to keep calm. I even told myself, just act normal. Don't make it worse. But the truth? I was grinning from ear to ear. There's a rare kind of satisfaction in knowing someone is about to walk straight into the consequences of their own overconfidence. Karen stomped out of her SUV like she was about to declare war on my ranch. "I'm not leaving until this fence is deactivated and boundaries are clarified," she declared, pointing at the fence like it was the villain in her personal drama. I raised an eyebrow. "Deactivate the fence?" I asked innocently. "Why would I do that?" She narrowed her eyes. "It's intimidating, hazardous, unacceptable." I laughed quietly, because that was exactly the reaction I had been hoping for. She was flustered, angry, and utterly convinced that she had the moral high ground. And she didn't realize that all of her plans were about to backfire spectacularly. She marched toward the fence, clipboard in hand, ready to document every inch. I leaned casually against the porch railing, sipping my coffee and watched the comedy unfold. My heart was racing, partly from anticipation, partly from amusement. Karen reached out, hand trembling slightly, and touched the fence post. The reaction was instantaneous. A sharp, harmless zap traveled up her arm. She screamed, staggering backward like a cartoon character, flinging papers and shouting, "What is this?" I couldn't help myself. I laughed, a full-bodied laugh that made Buster tilt his head like, "You did good, human." "Fence works," I said calmly, walking toward her. "Keeps livestock in, keeps trespassers out, keeps certain HOA presidents in check." Her face went red, a mix of fury, embarrassment, and disbelief. "You can't do this," she yelled. "This is outrageous. I'm going to report you." I smiled wider. "Report me? Please do. I'm sure the board will find your dignity somewhere around the driveway after you touched my fence." The board members around her were struggling to maintain composure. One of them whispered, probably thinking I couldn't hear, "I didn't sign up for this." Meanwhile, the guy with the camera had paused, clearly debating whether this was going to be a viral video moment or an HR incident. Karen, of course, wasn't finished. She stomped back to her clipboard, scribbling furiously, muttering about fines, legal action, and how no one disrespects the HOA. I just leaned back and watched her unravel in slow motion, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and amusement. But even in the chaos, I knew better than to relax completely. Karen didn't quit. She didn't take losses gracefully. This was just the beginning. She was already plotting something bigger, something she thought would finally force me to bow down. I glanced at the fence, a small smirk forming on my face. It wasn't just a fence. It was my silent ally, my unexpected hero in the face of entitled chaos. And Karen had learned the hard way that crossing it came with consequences. That day, as I watched her drive away, muttering and fuming, I realized something important. Karen's fantasy of controlling my ranch was shattered. She thought she could intimidate me with rules and letters, but one simple electric fence had reminded her exactly who was in charge. And if she thought she was done, well, she was sorely mistaken. I thought the electric fence would be enough to teach Karen a lesson. I was wrong, dead wrong. The next morning, I spotted her car creeping down my driveway like a tank on a mission. She had brought reinforcements, more board members, a lawyer who looked like he hadn't slept in a week, and someone carrying what looked suspiciously like a video camera tripod. Honestly, it was like a small army had descended upon my peaceful ranch. Karen hopped out, her heels clicking against the gravel, clipboard in hand, her face the perfect picture of righteous fury. "I'm not leaving until this matter is resolved," she announced, voice dripping with authority. "This property, your property, is under HOA scrutiny." I raised an eyebrow. "Under scrutiny?" I asked innocently, as if she had just asked me if my cows had filed taxes. "Well, welcome to my ranch. You can scrutinize all you want. Just stay off the fence this time, please." Her jaw dropped. "Fence, what are you implying?" I just smiled. "Nothing at all. You've proven your point already." She didn't find that funny, not one bit. Karen's approach now was different, calculated, deliberate, and clearly fueled by the humiliation of the previous encounter. I knew that look. I'd seen it before in high school debates, at town hall meetings, and once when a particularly stubborn goat refused to eat my hat. Karen was plotting. She was planning her ultimate comeback, and it wasn't going to be cute. The first escalation came in the form of a letter, or rather, a stack of them. I found them shoved under my door like some kind of passive-aggressive Christmas gift. Fines, threats of legal action, demands for meetings. The HOA had apparently decided that if one shock didn't work, paperwork and bureaucracy surely would. By noon, she was back in person, this time trying to block my driveway with traffic cones and official-looking signs that read, "Private property under HOA review." I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing. She looked like a child playing mayor, thinking she could stop the rancher from moving freely across his own land. I approached calmly, hands raised in mock surrender. "Really, Karen? Cones, this is your big plan." Her face twisted into pure rage. "I'm protecting the community," she shouted. "You cannot claim this property as your own without following HOA regulations." I leaned against the hood of my truck, smiling. "Ah, the community, how noble. You do realize this is private property, right? And the electric fence already made that very clear. She muttered something under her breath, furious that her plans were falling apart again. I could tell she was frustrated by my calmness, by the fact that I wasn't intimidated. And I couldn't help but feel a little thrill knowing she couldn't figure out how to control me. The neighbors, of course, were secretly enjoying the chaos. Some waved at me discreetly from behind their fences, others whispered, "This is better than reality TV." I couldn't blame them. Karen's escalation was pure entertainment if you didn't get personally involved. By the afternoon, she had made a few calls, supposedly to lawyers and some HOA authorities. I couldn't hear the conversations, but I could hear her muttering about lawsuits, fines, and enforcement. She was so focused on escalation that she didn't even notice Buster calmly circling her, making her feel watched without touching her. I decided it was time to let her simmer. Let her plot, let her plan, let her think she could intimidate me with paperwork, cameras, and cones. I was confident, calm, and prepared. She wasn't done yet, of course, not by a long shot, but I had learned one important truth. Karen thrived on intimidation, and the second she realized it didn't work, she panicked. And I had a feeling that panic was going to get very entertaining. I glanced at the fence, my mind already racing with possibilities. Karen's obsession was growing, her confidence fatting, and her ego was about to collide with reality. The next encounter would be interesting, to say the least. Because the truth was, Karen didn't just want control. She wanted humiliation. And the ranch, the fence, and we were ready to give her a reality check she'd never forget. The sun was just beginning to dip behind the hills, casting long shadows across the pasture. It was quiet, almost too quiet. I knew Karen was coming, and this time she wasn't bringing just clipboard warriors or legal letters. No, this time she had plans for a full-blown showdown, and I was ready. I had spent the morning double-checking the fences, locking the gates, and making sure every animal was accounted for. Even Buster seemed to sense the tension. He paced along the porch, ears perked like he was on high alert. I sipped my coffee slowly, trying to calm the mix of nerves and anticipation in my chest. There's a rare thrill in knowing your opponent is coming, unaware of exactly what they're walking into. Her car appeared at the end of the driveway, rolling like a tank of entitlement. Karen emerged, heels clicking with purpose, clipboard and phone in hand. She had the look of someone who had convinced herself this time, somehow, she was going to win. "Good evening," she said, voice dripping with authority. "I'm here to finalize this property dispute." I smiled casually. "Well, welcome back, Karen, ready to see the ranch in its full glory." She glared, muttering something about lawsuits under her breath. The board members accompanying her shuffled nervously, sensing that today might not go according to plan. Karen marched toward the fence, determined to touch it again, presumably to prove some point about her rights. I didn't move. I watched her calm, letting the suspense build. She had no idea that today she was about to learn a lesson she wouldn't forget. Her hand reached for the fence post. I held my breath, and then the zap. A sharp, harmless shock traveled up her arm, but this time I had tweaked the system slightly to make it a little more memorable. Karen screamed, stumbling back like she'd been launched into the air. Papers flew everywhere. Her phone slipped from her hand, narrowly missing a goat who looked far too smug for its own good. The board members gasped. The lawyers sputtered. The neighbors who had gathered secretly behind the fence were holding their sides, trying not to laugh. And Buster, he barked proudly like a tiny general surveying the battlefield. Karen's face was a masterpiece of fury, humiliation, and disbelief. This is unacceptable. You can't just... "I already told you," I interrupted calmly. "Mind the fence." She opened her mouth to respond, but I cut her off. "Karen, let me make it simple for you. This is my land, my rules, my animals, my fence, and if you step closer without permission, you will get exactly what you deserve." Her ego faltered. I could see it cracking beneath the surface. The realization that she had lost control, that she wasn't going to win this battle, no matter how many laws she cited or fines she threatened. In that moment, I felt a strange mix of relief, triumph, and, admit it, a little amusement. Karen had tried everything: letters, inspections, threats, and even cones. None of it worked, and now, standing there red-faced and defeated, she finally understood what I had known all along. She didn't own this ranch. I did. She turned and stormed back to her car, muttering about reporting me, taking legal action, and unacceptable behavior. But this time, there was no fire left in her step. She had lost the war not because of lawyers, not because of papers, but because she had underestimated me, and the humble electric fence that had become my unlikely ally. I watched her SUV disappear down the driveway, a grin spreading across my face. The neighbors waved discreetly, some chuckling, some shaking their heads in disbelief at the spectacle they had witnessed. Buster barked once like a victory cry, and I laughed, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't felt in weeks. As the sun dipped behind the hills, casting a golden glow over my ranch, I realized something important. The battle with Karen wasn't just about fences, HOA rules, or even property. It was about boundaries, respect, and standing your ground when someone tried to take what was rightfully yours. And in that moment, with the ranch quiet again, the animals grazing, and Buster curled up at my feet, I knew one thing for sure. Karen's fantasy of control was over. She had finally learned the hard way that some things, like a rancher's patience, a clever plan, and a very particular electric fence, should never, ever be underestimated. The next morning, the ranch was calm again, almost unnervingly so. The sun rose over the fields, birds chirped lazily, and the cows grazed without a care in the world, as if nothing had happened. But for me, the echoes of the past few weeks were still fresh in my mind. Karen, the HOA, the chaos, the electric fence, I couldn't help but smile. I walked the perimeter of my ranch, checking fences, gates, and livestock, but something felt different. The air was lighter. The tension had lifted. Karen wasn't coming back, at least not in full force. Her SUV hadn't been spotted in days, and the HOA had been strangely quiet. I had a feeling she was sitting at home, rereading her notes, muttering about property violations and next steps, slowly realizing that she had been completely outplayed. Neighbors began showing up, quietly at first, with small waves and knowing smiles. One of them, old Mr. Thompson from down the road, came over, shaking his head. "You really taught her a lesson, didn't you?" he said, chuckling. "I've never seen her like that before." I laughed, feeling a strange mix of pride and relief. "Lesson learned," I replied. "For both of us, I hope." The electric fence had become something more than just a barrier. It was a symbol of boundaries, of respect, and of standing up for what's yours. I never imagined I'd find myself in a showdown with an HOA president, much less using a fence as my secret weapon, but here I was. And honestly, I couldn't have imagined a more satisfying outcome. Word of Karen's defeat spread quickly through the neighborhood. People whispered about the rancher who stood up to the HOA and the infamous electric fence incident. Some even joked about starting a reality show, HOA Karen versus the rancher. I laughed at the thought, imagining Karen's face as the first shock zapped her again for good measure. But as much as I wanted to gloat, I knew better than to push it too far. This was about more than humiliation. It was about reclaiming control of my property and setting the record straight. Karen had tested me, but she hadn't broken me. And the ranch? Well, the ranch had always been mine. A few days later, the HOA sent what appeared to be a peace offering, a letter stating they would respect property lines and refrain from further inspections, at least for now. I read it aloud, savoring each word. "We understand the importance of private property," and I couldn't help but snort. "Oh, Karen, you had your fun, but the joke's on you." I hung the letter on the fridge and poured myself a cup of coffee. Buster jumped onto the porch, tail wagging, looking far too pleased with himself. I ruffled his fur and muttered, "We did good, buddy. We did real good." For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace settle over the ranch. The animals were calm, the fence was intact, and the sun cast a warm glow over the fields. I could finally enjoy the quiet, knowing that I had defended my home, my land, and my sanity. And as I watched the horizon, I realized something important. Life on a ranch isn't always peaceful. There will always be challenges, always be people who think they can control you, always be chaos waiting to erupt. But if you stand your ground, face the storm with patience and a little cleverness, you can come out the other side stronger with a story to tell. And trust me, this was a story worth telling. Every zap, every scream, every ridiculous HOA maneuver, it all led to one undeniable truth: my ranch, my rules. Karen had learned it the hard way, and now everyone else knew it too. From that day on, every time I saw a new HOA notice in the mail, I smiled and said quietly to myself, "Mind the fence, Karen, mind the fence." And remarkably, she did. The ranch was quiet again, peaceful, mine, and I wouldn't have it any other way. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one. The truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.